So what is the slope of a line? For example, when you go skiing down the snowy hill, what do they call them? It's a slope. It's like saying the slant of a line, or like the incline or decline of a line. More specifically, a slope is a ratio. It's a fraction that compares two things. It compares the change in the y-coordinate to the change in the x-coordinate. So what do I mean the change in? Well, when we're graphing lines, there are several points that make up the line. So for instance, if this is my x-axis and this is my y-axis, and let's say I have a line with several points. So let's say I have a point at, I'll use these 3 points, 2, 1, 4, 2, and 6, 3. Let's say that these 3 points make up a line. So let's plot them first. I have x is positive 2 and y is 1. So there's my first point. Okay, and that's 2, 1. My second point is 4, 2. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to go up 2 on the y-axis. So there's my second point. That's point 4, 2. And then my third point will be 6, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then 3. So my last point would be 6, 3. So as you can see, these 3 points make up a straight line. But when I say what is the slope of this line, I want to know from one point to another, how many times did x change and how many times did y change? For instance, let's look at this point 4, 2. Currently, the point 4, 2 is at number 4 on the x-axis and number 2 on the y-axis. And point 6, 3 is at number 6 on the x-axis and number 3 on the y-axis. So let's look at just the y-coordinates. So we have 2, which is the y-coordinate for the first point, and 3, which is the y-coordinate for the second point. So from the first point to the second point, how much did we change on the y-axis? Well, the first point is at number 2, and the second point is at number 3. So we changed 1 time in the y-axis. So I'm going to put that as the first part of my ratio because that is the change in y. But from 4 to 6, now we're talking about the x-axis, 4 and 6, from one point to the other, how many times did x change? Well, 4 went from 4 to 5 and 5 to 6. So the x value changed twice. So the slope of this line is 1 over 2, which means to get from one point to the other, you have to go up 1 and over 2. Okay? So another thing that you will hear the slope referred to is the rise over run. And that's kind of to help you remember that the numerator represents how many times the y-axis changed, and the denominator is showing you how many times the x-axis changed. Because when you rise, right, that's the y-axis, and when you run, that's the x-axis. So that's So let's look at some examples here. We're also going to have positive and negative slopes. So let's talk about that a little bit. For instance, I always like to use the bank as an example. So I'm going to show you 2 graphs. Okay? Let's say that this graph is showing my monthly income for 2006, and let's say that this one is showing my monthly income from 2009. And I'll just say my first month here is January, February, March, April, May. Let's say that this is June. And we'll do the same thing here. January, February, March, April, May, and this one is June. Okay? So let's say that the y-axis represents how much money I make. So let's say, obviously this is $0. Let's say that this represents $10,000, $8,000 in a month, $30,000, $40,000. And I'll use the same variables here. 20, 10, and then 0. So let's say in 2006, every month I looked at my bank account, I was like, ooh, in January I had 10,000. In February I had a little bit more. March I went up, and all year it just seemed like, wow, man, I'm making more money as the year goes on. This is a positive slope. If you look at it, if you were to read this graph from left to right, you see that it goes up. That's a positive slope. But let's say in 2009, I started off or ended, 2008 making a whole lot of money, but as the months went on, it just seemed like I was making a little bit less every month. So you can see 2009 was not a good year. That is a negative slope. When you read that graph from left to right, it is going down. So that is a negative slope. Let's do some examples. So let's say that you want to improve your health by joining a gym. And we all know that most gyms have that one-time registration fee or membership fee that you pay just at one time of about $100. And let's say that the monthly fee is $30 a month. Okay? So let's write an equation that describes this situation using y as the total cost. So how much money am I giving the gym all together? And x as the number of months. So we're just writing an equation to represent this cost. So y obviously equals, because everything that I put after the equal sign is going to be added together and it's going to give me my total cost. So if I'm paying $30 a month, that's $30 times x, because x represents the number of months, which I haven't told you how many months I've been at the gym yet, so we can't answer that question, plus the $100 flat fee. So notice the $100 does not have a variable next to it. It's not being multiplied by anything because that's a constant. It is a one-time fee of $100. But the 30 times x, if I told you I've been a member of the gym for 6 months, you'd plug in x is 6 to tell me how much did I actually pay. Well, I paid $180 in monthly fees plus my membership fee. I paid a total of $280. So that's an example of how equations would be used. Let's look at some more examples. Now there's something more specific that we need to know how to do, and that is finding the slope when all they gave you were 2 points on the line. So we have a formula, okay? So I'm going to write this down. This is only used to find the slope when given 2 points, okay? So, for instance, let's just say that they gave us the 2 points of 6, -3, and 4, 3. I'm going to show this 2 ways. I'm going to show it algebraically, which is using the formula, plugging it in, and doing the work. And I'm also going to show it visually, okay? So let's do it visually first because we already know how to plot points. Okay? Here's my graph. I have the first point, which is 6, -3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. -3, 1, 2, 3. So my first point goes right here, which is 6, -3. And my second point is 4, 3. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and y is +3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, +3. Okay? So you can see that this is the line they're asking me about. It wants to know what is the slope of this line. Now just looking at it, based on what I told you about the banking situation, is this a positive or negative slope? But when I read it from left to right, I can notice that as I move to the right, my graph is going down. So this is a negative slope. Okay? Now let's use a formula to prove that. Because I also want to know how much did y change and how much did x change. there's a formula, and this formula stays the same forever. M equals y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Now, the M stands for the slope. The y2 minus the y1 and the x2 minus x1, all that's telling you, it's like a labeling system. It does not mean an exponent. It does not mean anything like that. What it means is I have two x's and I also have two y's, right? You were given 2 points. That should make sense. So all we're going to do is plug the numbers in appropriately. Keep in mind the y coordinates always go in the numerator. So y2 I labeled as the point 3. There is a minus sign in the formula, so minus y1, which happens to be negative, divided by x2, which we labeled as 4, minus sign in the formula, x1, which is 6. So now we're just going to use the order of operations. This negative makes this negative a positive, so I really have 3 plus 3, which is 6. And here I have 4 minus 6, which is a negative 2. If we simplify 6 divided by negative 2, we get a slope of negative 3. Now you can see that previously when we graphed the line, we already knew that this was going to be a negative line. So this is telling us that to get from one point to a next, we're going to go up and down 3 and over 1. Okay, so this is my rise and this is my run. So let's just kind of check that out. I have 4, 3, so let's start at this point. It's telling me I'm going to go down 3 because it's negative 3, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to go over 1. Look, I landed right on the line. Now from this point to the point 6, 3, I'm going to go down 3, 1, 2, 3, and over 1. And look, I landed right on the line. So the slope basically tells you how many times to move up or down, depending on if it's negative or not, and how many times to move left or right. So let's try a couple more problems. Let's look at another example. Let's say that they gave us the points 3, 6 and 5, 2. So again, I know my formula is M equals y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So that I don't get confused, I like to label everything. This is my first x and my first y. This is my second x and my second y. So I'm going to plug them in accordingly. y2 is 2, minus sign is in the formula, y1 is 6, divided by x2 is 5, minus sign is in the formula, x1 is 3. Then we just simplify. 2 minus 6 is negative 4. 5 minus 3 is a positive 2. I get a slope of negative 2. Let's do a couple more. Let's use the points negative 2, and negative 12, negative 8. I have the formula again, and you should eventually memorize this formula because teachers don't typically give it to you. x2 minus x1, and again, you can only use it when given 2 points. And the only thing it's going to tell you is the slope. So that's the only time you use that formula. So again, I'm labeling. I have my first x and my first y, my second x, my second y. I'm going to plug it in appropriately. So I have negative 8, minus sign in the formula, and y1 is negative 2, divided by x2, which is negative 12, minus sign in the formula, x1, which also happens to be negative. So you're going to see that this negative makes this negative a plus, so it's really negative 8 plus 2, divided by, again, this negative makes this negative a plus, so it's negative 12 plus 2. So I get negative 6 at the top and negative 10 at the bottom. And negative divided by negative I know is a positive 6 over 10. And I need to simplify. I can divide by 2, so I get 3 over 5. So that means to get from one point to the next, I'm going to go up 3 and over 5. Let's just do one more. Let's do the point 8, negative 4, and 8, negative 3. Again, take a couple seconds just to label everything. x1, y1, x2, y2. Formula that you should memorize. M equals, which is the slope, y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Plug them in appropriately. So y2 is negative 3 minus sign in the formula y1, which is negative 4, divided by x2, which is 8, minus sign in the formula x1, which is also 8. So we can see that this negative makes this negative a positive. So I end up with negative 3 plus 4 divided by 8 minus 8. Negative 3 plus 4 I know is 1. 8 minus 8 is 0. So anything that's divided by 0 is undefined. Now that means something special when it comes to graphs. Whenever a slope has an undefined slope, it's always the same kind of line, and that is a vertical line. All vertical lines have undefined slopes. All of them. Every last one of them. Which brings us to another special case. Horizontal lines. All horizontal lines have a slope of 0. So let's look at some examples. What if, we'll start with vertical and horizontal. So we have vertical and horizontal. So again, vertical lines have a slope that's undefined, whereas horizontal lines have a slope that is always 0. Okay. Vertical lines are always written in the equation form x equals, and I'm going to just say some number. And horizontal lines are always written y equals some number. For example, a vertical line would have the example x equals 5. Well, how would I graph this? Let's draw a graph. If x is 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not going to draw a horizontal line. I'm going to draw a vertical line at x equals 5. Now let's do a horizontal one. What about y equals 2? Well, let's draw a graph. On the y-axis, I'm going to go up to 2, and I'm going to draw a horizontal line. Notice that vertical lines are parallel to the y-axis, even though the equation is x equals. And horizontal lines are parallel to the x-axis, even though the equation is y equals. It's almost the exact opposite, if you want to think about it like that. So let's just do a couple more examples. Let's do x is 1. Graph. You go to the number 1 on the x-axis and you draw your line. What about y is negative 4? Again, draw your graph. You go to negative 4 on your y-axis and you draw your horizontal line.